How do you start a podcast? Introduce ourselves.
Welcome to the Mayhem Performance Podcast, sponsored by Froning Farms, Buffalo Brew, and Faith Family Fitness and Service.
Yeah, something like that's fun. Perfect. Yeah. I think we start introducing ourselves, and we'll start with how we got to Mayhem, because you have a lot of controversy and drama surrounding your story. I'm just kidding.
Yes.
Dom, you kick us off. Who are you? How'd you get with Mayhem? Like, what is your background, how you got to Mayhem, and we'll go from there.
Cool. So Mayhem, how did I get here? Well, I took my level 1 at the original Mayhem next to the laser tag in 2013. And Austin Stack, one of our fellow Mayhem performance coaches, told me that I should start training for the CrossFit Games.
Did he really say that?
Yeah,
to you?
I swear to God.
That's awesome. Stack would do that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was kind of hyped. And honestly, I was like, I kind of don't really care about the CrossFit Games at that point. Went back to Naples, actually started coaching at my affiliate there. Met a bunch of guys there. That's eventually where I ended up working at North Naples CrossFit. Met Matt Torres. He coached me, then kind of interned me up, taught me how to do competitive programming, mentored me up on that end. And then fast forward all the way to helping him coach for Brute at the 2023 games. And randomly ended up staying in the RV park somehow. And next thing I know, I'm being asked in the RV park if I was interested in a spot at Mayhem. And I was like, I don't know.
I feel like I should jump in on this story now. So I had met Dom, I had never met Dom. I had been told about Dom, and just I had a mutual friend. It was a mutual friend of a mutual friend that had kept telling me that if we ever needed coaches, I should look into this guy, Dom D'Agostino, and that he was considering leaving Brute. I didn't get a lot of detail. Looked up his Instagram. Honestly, like I think one time a couple months before the games, didn't think twice about it. And then I'm walking at the games through the RV park, and we knew we were going to be launching one-on-one coaching through Mayhem somewhere like shortly after the games, or we had already been talking about it, and we knew we needed to build our coaching staff. And I saw Dom chatting with one of his athletes, and I was like, oh, that's a guy that, my buddy had been telling me about. And honestly, I didn't think twice about it in the moment. I was like, I'm just going to keep walking. And I was talking with somebody else. And then a few steps in, after just seeing you out of the corner of my eye, I felt like it's the Holy Spirit, man. It was like, you need to stop, you need to turn around, you need to go talk to that guy. And I just felt this tug, like I need to stop. So I literally stopped walking with the guy I was walking with and was like, hey, man, I'll catch up with you later. And then walked up to Dom, and just like he said, I literally just kind of said, hi, I'm Jake Foster. Do you want to come coach at Mayhem?
Yeah.
And that's how it started. So
that was pretty wild.
Yeah.
I think I remember like walking away from that after, because I had kind of come to the conclusion that I was probably going to coach like Nate, Jess, and Nina until they were kind of done. And I was just going to do it out of my friend's garage, which is wild. And my friend back at home, he owns a Kia dealership, and it was his garage that he was letting us train out of for free. And he was actually a guy that I trained with like most of my life, like when I was competing. So we were doing that. And in my head, I had talked to him specifically like, hey, I think I'll probably only be coaching like another year or two. I'm going to come work at the dealership. And
saved you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Car sales.
And then, yeah. God sent a prophet in the RV park now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So. Well, I don't know about profit, but no, that was cool. It was cool how it all worked out. We started talking that night, met at a hotel, and started going through logistics. But yeah, cool. Been awesome to have you. Dom is now the on-site coach at Mayhem. So actually, why don't you say a little bit about like what you're doing on a daily basis with the athletes?
Yeah. So we all kind of like met up, and we're trying to find a cool blend between individualized programming and the Mayhem group setting way, which we kind of felt like as coaches, and knowing like the success that Rich has had with everybody, just like how do we blend the two together and really make something like special out of it. And so we've been trying to work on blending that together, and that's just getting all the athletes together on a daily basis, training, trying to work on some individual weaknesses per person, but at the same time doing some group training together as well. And it's kind of my role to lead that, help people stay on track, help people show up on time, and then at the same time, like individualize the programming a little bit to their needs in person, and really just help these guys get prepared for as much prepared for the game season as they can, especially since Rich is like semi-retired now, but it kind of feels like I've been coaching him a few times lately. I keep busting him about thinking about masters, but he keeps ignoring me.
Someday. Yeah, so I'll jump in. Like my story, you went all the way back to the beginning. I'll give like a really quick synopsis. So I think I started coaching in 2017, started in classes, had a coach at the time who really opened my eyes to coaching the whole person, a different way of coaching. I always thought fitness coaching was just telling people to do curls or working out. Even in CrossFit, I was like, you're just writing workouts for people. Like, it's not that fulfilling, if I'm being honest. I was a teacher at the time, and that was my passion. I was in graduate school. I thought I was going to get my PhD. I thought I was going to teach for the rest of my life. And then I hired this coach, and he blew my mind with conversations, not just about training and nutrition, but also about like my life and my beliefs and my core values and how I manage stress and like my sleep and my relationships and my devotion life, like all these things that made me a better athlete. But through that experience, I was like, man, I really want to teach fitness and kind of marry those passions that I had of teaching and education with training and fitness. And I want to do what he's doing. I want to have that same impact on other people. So I started coaching individuals shortly after that. So I've been doing it for the last several years. How I got to Mayhem, I was doing my own remote coaching. I actually was teamed up with Underdogs for a bit. I was living in Nashville, and then, I wasn't commuting to Vegas or anything like that, but I was coaching remotely for them. And so we had an event, Legends, which was in Cookeville 2 years ago, I think. And I came out here for that with Underdogs just to help coach some of the athletes and hang out. And I met Lockhart here at the event, and I just struck up a conversation with him. And to be honest, like working here started as a bit of a joke. He and I had a mutual friend who was leaving Underdogs, and he made a comment like, hey, does it change anything for you now that, so-and-so is leaving? And I don't know, the first thing that came to mind was just to make a joke. And I was like, not unless you guys want to hire me. And, Lockhart's like, like whatever. And then once I said it, I was like, well, that sounds really cool. And so then immediately I was like, hey, I think I can help you guys. I think I can help you build out, an individual program. I think it's something that would be incredibly valuable, not just to athletes outside of Mayhem and the business, but the athletes that we have in-house. And so we went back and forth in emails, and long story short, it worked out. So got to come and at the beginning, work alongside Facundo and help build out like Mayhem ID, which is what it was called at the time, and then eventually changed the name to what it is now, Mayhem Performance Coaching. So it's been it feels like 5 years. It feels like I've been here, but it's only been a year. So I've been here like 6 months.
Yeah.
Probably feels like 6 years.
I moved here in October.
Yeah. So, well, basically we wanted to use this podcast or this conversation as an opportunity to, I think first and foremost, educate, right? Talk a little bit about Mayhem Performance Coaching, like who we are, what we do, how we operate, but through that, educate people on our systems, our processes, and how we coach from program design, maybe a little nutrition chat here or there, but we probably want to stay away from that based on the controversial side of nutrition that I've learned about in a recent social media post. But yeah, we want to keep this pretty high level and in the initial conversation and talk about our fancy, I guess, like outlook or philosophy on how we design training for a year for like the open and quarterfinal level athlete.
Sure. I think something like Jake and I have been talking a lot about lately, and just even with the rest of our coaching staff, is like, what does it look like to create a year plan for athletes that are competing in the sport that aren't yet at the games or semifinal level, who have the potential to do that, but also like we were athletes like that as well. And there's so many times when I was in that phase, and regionals was a real goal for me and something that was attainable. But I think like even when I think back on it myself, like there's moments that I regret of not competing more often. And that was something like I kind of brought into coaching is just like convincing people to use their training and to start learning how to use it and do it in a smart way where they can still train for the bigger and loftier goal, but also like utilize their fitness throughout the course of their journey. So their journey actually means something to them, whether they meet that loftier goal or not. And I think that's something that as we've been putting this system together and thinking about a season outlook that we can bring to Mayhem Performance clients that are working with us so they can really get the most out of the years that they actually do get to do competitive CrossFit.
Yeah, I think I fell in the trap for a long time. Like in the early days of CrossFit, I feel like everybody was competing too much, right? Like It was like every other weekend was a local throwdown. And so my bias initially is like when I first started coaching individuals was to try to pull people back. And I think like most things in life, we swing on a pendulum, and I probably went too far in the opposite direction, meaning like I discouraged people from, like you said, using their fitness and honestly in some ways just having fun. I was like, hey, like, you're going to take this serious or not? Like, and if you're going to take it serious, like, you need to stop competing all the time.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I hope I've come kind of back towards the middle where it's not like, hey, don't compete at all or just have your one event of the year that you peak for and you go all out for. And that's what we want to talk about. Like, what, Dom, you can jump in. Like, what is your ideal setup for an open or quarterfinal level athlete who knows they're not making semifinals and the games is, semifinals is maybe 2-3 years off for them?
Sure.
How would you set up a year for them so that they can balance, like, again, like you said, using their fitness, but not doing too much to where they're not competing every other week and they actually have time to train and develop in areas that they need to get better at?
Right. Yeah, and I think oddly enough, like I was on the opposite end of that where I was so focused on just one competition that I wouldn't do any competitions all year and only train. And so sometimes like when I did do a couple local comps or like I qualified for a Wodapalooza, I would like do poorly because I didn't know how to compete. Yeah. Right. But when it came to an online qualifier, I would dominate like qualifiers or open workouts because that's what I was training for all the time and I was comfortable doing. So I think for like
back up, even by compete, you mean like it's not just like competing, like being on the floor and throwing down against other people, but like even the little like nutrition and
all of that stuff.
Yeah. Like how do you fuel throughout the day? Sleep. Yeah.
And then like even
if you get no rep by a judge, how do you respond? Like,
right.
So yeah.
Right. And even back then, like when I was doing the open, there was no floor plans. So like your transition was standing up from the rower because the rower was underneath the pull-up bar and you're like standing up doing the toes to bar over the top of the rower.
Like dropping
so
from
you
the
can
pull-up
get
bar
back
into
the rower. Yeah. Like, so when I would get to competitions, like I didn't even understand what it looked like to jog in transition or to like place chalk in specific spots in transition. I'm looking around, other people are doing this and I'm like,
yeah,
I don't need to.
Competing is a skill.
Right. So it actually helped me like become a better coach, to be honest, because once I realized that that's what it was like, that's kind of how I got to this thought process and the things we've been working on and talking about is like opening quarterfinal level athletes for sure. Like we want to do well in those competitions. So I would say like most CrossFit athletes can have about 2 or 3, but usually 2 tapers that will actually be very successful in a season. And if we do it correctly, we want to like probably do one for either open or quarters so we get our best and real result before we go into an off-season training. And then maybe pick one off-season comp until we've gotten to a place where like, hey, we're going to make a run at semifinals this year. And then when you get to that year, that's maybe when you don't taper for the off-season comp. You just do it as a competition experience and you put the full taper going into semifinals. But
explain tapering real quick.
Yeah. So just, I think basically on tapering,
without diving into the details,
you should jump in on this as well, but it would be like a full deload week where we're really pulling back on all of our lifts, all of our intensity even, and just like making sure we go into the competition fresh, healthy, central nervous system recovered and like dying to compete. Like the way I always would explain it to my athletes when they ask me is by 3 days into your taper, I want you to be begging me to be on the floor. Right. And that's really the goal of that. But if we do that more than 2 times a year, at some point, it's not going to be effective. And it's actually just going to dampen and drop our highest numbers. Right. And most of my athletes that I've worked with, either at semifinal or games level, like when we get back into training after the games and we've done those major tapers, like their lifts are down a good 15-ish pounds. And as we build back up through the season, like it comes back. But that's because like we maximize their central nervous system for the week at the games or the 4 days at semis.
To just draw a comparison to another sport like running, I've been running for 3 months, so don't quote anything I'm saying right now. Disclaimer. But Instagram. I do know that in a lot of the like elite pro marathoners, those guys are logging. Again, it's kind of like estimates from what I've heard or seen, like 70, 80, even upwards. I've heard like 90 miles a week. And then the week leading into their marathon or a week out from it, they might be as low as like 25, 30 miles. Like, they're doing like 4 to 6 mile easy runs, which is a joke for them going into it. So, yeah, that's essentially that is what a taper is. Sure. You have little doses of intensity to like keep the system fresh. So you're not like, wow, it's been a week since I've actually breathed at all. But yeah, you're pulling back so that you can walk into a competition fresh, and you're getting a little, like you said, like a little detrained in a sense too from it. So, or dampened, but that's another conversation. Yeah. So yeah, I think then taking that, so that's where we're pushing our athletes, like open quarterfinal level athletes. If they come to us and they're like, I want to work with Dom, Jake, Mike, Austin, whoever it is. And, my goal this year is to, peak for the open. I want to crush it. I want to get top 25%. I want to go to quarterfinals. By the way, that's most of the people we coach with Mayhem Performance Coaching. Yeah. That is like 95% of the athletes that we're working with. It is not games level athletes or semifinal level athletes. A, because there are not that many of them, right? And then B, they take a lot of time. But the open and quarter level athlete, like that's primarily who we're working with, and it's who we're passionate about helping. So if you had somebody who came to you, Dom, and said, "Hey, look, I've never made quarterfinals. Last year I was 75th percentile. Wait, shoot, that's quarters now, right? Isn't it?
Yeah,
top 25. Dang
top
it,
25%.
70th percent, right? Yeah. And I want to get into the top 25 this year. That's like my only goal. How would you have that conversation with them? What else are you telling them to do?
Yeah, so I mean, if that's really where they're coming at, then obviously that biggest taper is going to be to set them up for the 3 weeks of the open, to make sure that they qualify for quarterfinals. And then I'd probably do a nice small like deload for them leading into quarters, but understanding that like quarters is more of almost like a off-season test for us than it is really like a full-on competition. I would have them pick a live competition that's not a video type of like scoring or an online, just like an online leaderboard, online competition. I would have them pick something that we're actually going to go to and learn how to compete. And then maybe the year after, right, the conversation after the open, if they qualify for quarters for the first time, the year after, it's like, okay, next year we're going to peak and taper for quarterfinals, knowing we're going to make it through the open easy. And then we're also going to choose another comp. And then if they do well in quarters that year, then the next goal is like, hey, let's see if we can make a push for semis. And we really, really taper for quarters. And that's what I just talk out a 3-year plan.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Done.
But with most of my athletes, like maybe not so much anymore, but when I lived in Naples, like I would kind of always push Wadapalooza because it was always an opportunity for me to drive an hour and a half over to Miami. And
yeah, I was gonna say, what's the best time to do a live competition? Like obviously, yeah, in a perfect world, if you're like, hey, if you could pick a live competition at this time during the year, so you got open or quarters as your one primary comp, when's the next one?
Honestly, like that October timeframe, I think is amazing. Or even something like in the summer, like late summer, something somewhere around the games time between like August and October, I think is a really nice
What's your thought process around that?
Yeah, so the way I think about it is just like, so let's say open, what are we in March? So open ends at the end of March. So that gives us April, May, June, July, 4 months of off-season training, which is normally where my head goes, like 3 to 5 months of off-season. Ideally, if you're a games athlete, it's usually a little bit less because of the way the season goes. But for our open or quarterfinals level athlete, like most people have a strength priority in those seasons, and you need at least 4 months to get something out of it, right? I would say 3 minimum to really get some strength gains. So by doing that, if I get a 3-month period, then I can get a month of a little bit of comp prep to like kind of get ready, and then really go out there and like show out. And honestly, like if you're getting to a higher level, even for our quarterfinal level athletes, like if you're doing an RX or an elite comp, you potentially like win some money at these local things, actually have some like fun doing that, and getting your feet wet. Like I actually have a remote athlete right now We'll taper pretty good for quarterfinals. Like, we're pretty confident he'll make that. And he qualified for an RX division. I think it's the NorCal Classic, which is like September-ish time when that comes around. And that's like his other main comp of the year. So I'm going to like prep him pretty good for that. And then we'll go back into focusing on the season. So those are like quarterfinals and that.
Yeah. So if you have somebody with a strength deficit, you get a solid 12-week strength cycle, a week of feeling good about, CrossFit again. And not that you're not doing CrossFit during that time.
Right.
And we could dive into that a little bit. Like, what does that look like without getting too much into the weeds? And then you get competition, a little deload, maybe like a little week off or something like that, a week chill. Then you get another 4 months before the open or quarters, maybe even longer if the peak next year is at quarters. So you get these like 2 chunks where you can have like actually a full 16-week training block in between.
Yep.
And then you get to test yourself. You get to have fun, like you were saying.
Yeah.
I think this is what we've really come up with our coaches is that we're going to push, and we are pushing most people in this direction. We think this is like the ideal way to train if you're saying your goal is to improve in the sport of CrossFit. Go talk about a little bit, just touch on it. I know it gets into like a much kind of more in-depth conversation that we can have maybe sometime in the future, but you touch a little bit on it, like, hey, I'm going to do 3 months of strength. When people hear that, they might think like, I'm going to get fat, or like, I'm going to lose all my fitness. I'm going to suck at CrossFit. And that's a common misconception. So yeah, touch on that a little bit.
Here's the deal. If you actually want to get fat and strong, you have to basically only do some small like mono work in a second session, do only weightlifting in your AM sessions, and you have to eat probably 7,000 to 8,000 calories a day. And that'll still probably not do it because that's what I had Nate do, and it was probably the hardest thing ever to get weight on that guy.
If you're what is he, 18?
I'm sure that depends on the person, but again,
if we're talking about 40-year-old Bob,
right.
Bob's getting fat. I'm sorry, Bob. Yeah.
Sure. But like, it takes a lot more to get fat than we think doing CrossFit. Like, we could probably all use a nice little strength cycle, but when we do say that, we're not neglecting fitness when we're doing that. It just means that strength is the priority. So like a really easy way to like think about this, and I'll use like Mayhem programming as an example, is as a whole, like Mayhem compete, and even like what we do on the onsite is like we usually condition first, right? Or there's multiple days where we're conditioning first, and then we go into our strength piece. In the off season, that would flip flop, right? If I have someone who really struggles snatching both technically and strength wise, I'm gonna have 2 separate days. I'm gonna have one day technical, one day working on the basic strength of it. And that's going to be the priority of those days. In the CrossFit is going to be a maintenance cycle. So what I'm looking for there is like aerobic maintenance work that's going to keep them at the level of fitness that they're at, but allow them to progress in the strength. And I'm going to be okay with the fitness being dampened by the strength, right? And then honestly, in the off season, a lot of it looks really monostructural, which like most people need machine work anyways.
Yeah.
So it's a really good time to work on that as well. But it's all about like allocating priorities. Like, look at your weaknesses, and my like general rule of thumb, and this is actually something that Matt taught me, honestly, is just like pick 3 priorities. Go to the list from testing that you recognize are your 3 biggest weaknesses, and make those the foundation of your off season, right? No matter whether you're a strength athlete, aerobic athlete, you need gymnastics work, whatever those specific things are, even down to the specific movement, make those the 3 priorities of your off season and crush them.
Yeah.
Even if some of your amazing stuff comes down a little bit, if your weaknesses come up and you get to here, instead of having this gap, you are now a better CrossFitter, because the CrossFitter is about being pretty decent at everything.
And to speak to the devil's advocate that's like, well, but CrossFit, we get better at everything simultaneously. It's like, yeah, that works for the newbie. Sure. I think most people listening to this who've been doing it for a little while realize like at some point you have to have some bias. You have to have some prioritization. I almost feel like that's old news now. Like we all pretty much get that. I love the Dan John quote, old strength coach. He said like, fitness is like chasing rabbits, and people want to chase all the rabbits at the same time. He's like, you're better off chasing one rabbit, catching it, and moving on to the next. You chase all the rabbits, you're not going to catch any of them. Going back to like conditioning and what does CrossFit training look like, or mixed training, like where you're doing mixed modalities, pull-ups, burpees, et cetera, box jumps. And you said most of it, I would agree, would be a bias towards monostructural work, like building your base on the machines. You can learn how to pace more effectively on the machines. You're not going to turn into muscle endurance like it would if you're doing pull-ups and burpees, et cetera. But there is still a way that you can program burpees, pull-ups, all the other wall balls, et cetera, and do it in a way that actually reduces intensity so that you're not taking away from the prioritization of strength, assuming, again, that's what most open quarterfinal athletes need. Yeah. And if you go back and look at Mayhem compete last spring, right after the open, you'll notice that there were some changes that we made, like Lockhart and I, and we were cycling through some like different ideas of how can we still play with these movements, get touches on the movements, but put in some limiters to keep people from going too hard.
Sure.
And you'll see it this upcoming cycle after the open with compete as well, where we're going to have, you'll notice it as you're going through it. Like you're like, I can't really go that fast in here. If I had to give a quick example, like something really simple and really small, I call it like a bottleneck workout, right? Where at some point during the workout, the intensity just absolutely plummets. And you could do it something as simple like with a chipper, or the first thing that comes to my mind is something like 2 rounds for time, 30 strict pull-ups, and 60 wall balls, right? Like the workout, I mean, like good luck going really fast on 60 total strict pull-ups and 120 wall ball. Like you might be able to really push those second set of wall balls, but on those 30 strict pull-ups, like everybody's breaking those in like sets of 5.
Yeah.
So the intensity just comes way down, and it's less likely to take away from strength gains, unless you're trying to get really good at like weighted pull-ups or something. Then that might not be.
Sure. How do you work into like, that's something like I feel like you've taught me a little bit, is like when you do the higher volume of sets, but like the shorter rep schemes, like how do you work that in?
Oh yeah. Okay. So I get this shout out Sean McGovern. He calls it aerobic resistance, which is like you can do resistance training and make it aerobic, but it can be a bit of an oxymoron. But it's basically like really low rep and high set. So we got this from like a travel workout that me and my former coach Sean started doing, or that he came up with, which was like, I got 30 minutes in the hotel gym and I don't really have any equipment, but like a pull-up bar, what do I do? And he would do 1 strict pull-up, 2 push-ups, and 6 lunges for 30 minutes. And I've done it before, and I've gotten 100 rounds. Yeah. And so you're moving the whole time. You're never hitting muscle failure, muscle fatigue. Yeah. And it's really aerobic. It's sustainable. Another workout that a lot of people at a probably more semifinal level can make aerobic, that's a good example of that, is Hollyman. And it was, 25 minute AMRAP of 1 power clean at 225, 3 wall balls, or 3 handstand push-ups, 5 wall balls. Yeah. And it's just something that nobody ever has to slow down on. Yeah. So I think that's a great way to incorporate, like, hey, we can still practice CrossFit specific movements, do them very low rep where we're not getting into muscular endurance and more muscle fatigue, play with the movements and keep it aerobic.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a great way to, like, something that I've started using since you've shown me that, for especially athletes who need like development on specific gymnastics movements, is like they can actually handle those reps, but then at the end of the session as well, they're accumulating like 50 bar muscle ups, but they're doing sets of 2, which is manageable for them right now. And it actually allows them to like drill in good technique and like efficiency in it, as well as staying aerobic. So they're not like getting into bad habits because they're reaching muscle failure, which I feel like in an off season is like super helpful if you can learn how to move well.
For sure. Yeah. And you get, like you said, you just get a ton of touches on the movement too. And, you know, it's not skill training, but like it's a great opportunity if you're trying to work on efficiency on coming down on a rope climb, and you're doing like 1 rope climb, 5 wall balls, 30 double unders, like, and you're just doing 10 minutes of that. Like, it's a great opportunity to go, oh, this is a good time to practice. I'm doing 1 at a time. I don't really have any fatigue. I can really focus on moving better, you know.
Yeah.
So
how do you get like athletes, when you're programming like that, how do you get them to not go like 100% during the 10-minute AMRAP and just like wreck themselves? Like
I don't. I fail miserably at that. Yeah. I try to write good intent, you know, around that. So, and a lot of this is arbitrary, right? So I actually had an athlete come up to me today, Jaden, like, you know, and she's like, hey, you said like you should be moving at like this 30-minute pace, or, you know, hypothetical pace I could sustain for 30 minutes. I have no idea what that feels like. And again, it's like an imperfect way of just being like, hey, if I was giving you a workout and you're doing a 10-minute AMRAP, and let's say I wanted you moving at a pace you could sustain for like 40, 60 minutes if you had to, then you would know that pace, if you're moving for 60 minutes straight without stopping, it's conversational.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to describe it. And in running and actually hiring a running coach, the way he describes it with me is like, you should be able to be speaking in paragraph form, like literally a full conversation with somebody as you're doing these long, easy runs. So with something like that, it's like you should literally, somebody could walk up to you and just be like, yo, what's up? How's your day going? And you just start talking to them. Yeah. So
that's good.
I think that's a good, indirect way. I don't love using heart rate. That's another conversation. But there's so many variables that go into
I think especially when you're doing mixed work as well, because then it's certain movements spike people's, like, there's nothing you can do about that.
That's where linear progression helps a lot too. But on the machines, it helps, right? Because if you've done a 5K row time trial, you know what a 20-minute pace feels like.
True.
If you've done a 10K row time trial, you know what it feels like to row for 40 minutes without stopping, right? If you ever done an hour on the row or on the bike or whatever it might be, you're like, okay, like I could, I couldn't come out like a bat out of hell. But if you've never tested anything like that, you don't know what it feels like. Machines are the best way to learn that. And then that'll help carry over and translate better to some of the mixed work like we're talking about.
For sure.
It goes back to your point of bias machines in the off season. It's going to teach you how to pace.
Yeah. And it's a great way too for like when you are kind of hammering strength training to like not be adding an extra squatting or extra knee flexion or hinging when you're probably doing plenty of that in your strength training anyways, depending on if you're in an accumulation phase or anything like that, or a hypertrophy phase where the reps are higher.
What do you do with the strength work then? So you say, okay, let's say we had somebody did a 12-week block of strength training, and now you've got like a month, 4, maybe even 6 weeks going into competition, like that live comp. Let's say it's Wodapalooza qualifiers in September, October. What do you do with strength once you make that transition? Because you don't want to lose it, but it's not the priority anymore for a few weeks.
Sure.
How do you maintain it?
Yeah, so like that's definitely something I kind of did with some of my higher levels who were trying to qualify for Elite Wodapalooza for the first time this year. And like I had them do some pretty serious strength training in the off season. And I wanted them to be able to express that, but I also wanted them to feel like confident going into the qualifier that they were going to be fit enough, because we all know Wodapalooza qualifiers are just like stupid aerobic. Yeah. And like understanding that at the end of the day too, that like newfound strength would also carry them even if they were feeling a little less fit than normal. But in that 4-week period, like something I did with them is some of the volume came down on the strength training in terms of like rep volume, but like intensity is going up a little bit on a more consistent basis. So instead of like doing real stupid, simple example, but instead of doing like constant sets of like 10s and 8s on back squats or something, for someone like Nina who has a pretty high NME, like I'm moving her now
it's a lot of
into
jargon,
like
NME.
Yeah, sorry.
No, forget about that.
Yeah. Write that off.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that another time. But like dropping her to like a couple weeks of 3s, a couple weeks of 2s, and then a week of singles.
Maybe not even multiple sets sometimes, right?
Right.
Like build to a tough 3.
Right. Yeah.
Right,
and
done.
just like more of a conjugate style.
Yeah.
Honestly, of like heavy triple today, heavy double today, heavy single today.
Yeah.
And allowing her to kind of just feel those heavier loads leading into competition. And then starting to work in more of the mixed work. And then actually what I did with her, like I think the 3 weeks leading into Wodapalooza qualifiers is every Friday I actually gave her an old qualifier. And I was like, set up your camera, like, and pretend like you're competing.
Yeah. By the way, too, just to touch on like an old qualifier or something like that, I don't know about you, but pretty much year round for me, I have a bias of like every Friday or Saturday. We do this with Mayhem Compete. So Mayhem Performance clients, we always choose one Mayhem Compete workout, at least one every week that we've anchored, and everybody does it. It's a lot of fun. We post our scores on, we have software called Circle. It's like a Facebook group, so everybody can see each other's scores. But I like almost having like, if that is just like interval training or something, I'll give year round like every like a throwdown to somebody.
Yeah.
Like I want to play the game year round. And so that's almost been like a staple for me where it doesn't really matter where we're at in the season, unless it's like a deload week or a couple weeks or whatever. I'm giving them a Saturday at the end of their session, just absolute like, and sometimes I'll let it get nasty, like a 3 to 4 minute, just like Fran-esque style piece where it's just like, oh, I was about to drop one of the Everyday Hero workouts. I can't do that, right? Yeah, don't say that. Yeah, but just like a burner. That's a great, I just totally, what is that called where you preview it? Pitched it?
Spoiler alert.
Thank you. Yeah. But yeah, anyway, a plug is what I was looking for. Anyway, go back to it. Yeah, I like having a throwdown But I think the other point to drive home is that we're talking about people who need to get stronger year round in order to get to their ultimate goal of, crushing quarterfinals or maybe getting to a semifinal or maybe one day even making the CrossFit Games. So even going into the Wodapalooza qualifiers, if that's your live off-season comp that you choose, you're still not, in 4 weeks, you're not going to feel as fit as you should or would if that was your primary goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to drive that home.
Yeah. And I think even in that 4 week period, it's not necessarily that we're trying to have you at your best fitness, it's not like a crash course. All it is to do is to remind you that CrossFit hurts and you know how to hurt because you're a CrossFitter. Yeah. And that's really it. Especially with those workouts that I was giving her.
You're not looking for massive improvements in aerobic capacity in 4 weeks.
Really?
Maybe any at all.
Yeah. Really. I'm just are you the same fitness wise as you were 4 months ago?
Yeah.
Yes. Sweet. Are you stronger? Yes. You're a better CrossFitter.
Exactly.
Done.
Yep.
And then it's we'll get a little bit fitter after this qualifier because now we're in that season where now we're training for the Elite Wodapalooza. And by the time I got her and Jess out there, they were doing tons of aerobic work, from October, November, December, they were grinding in it. Right. And those are two very different athletes. Jess was way backed off strength because we're trying to get her fit. Nina still needed strength gains. So that was still the priority of her session. But we did start working more conditioning in at that point to have her ready for it because it was something she wanted to do well at. And I'm cool with that too. She's realistic. Her and I want to make a run at the games, obviously, but she knows where she's at in this journey, and she's only been CrossFitting for a few years. And last year was her first semifinal. So, we want to play on some of the things. So, I tapered her a little bit more from Wodapalooza than I probably would next year if she were to do it.
And if you have the rare athlete, too, that, they're actually really strong. You have somebody who came from a powerlifting background, which I've had before, and they get into CrossFit, it's really just flipped, right? Right before, you're not going, hey, I'm now going to do a month of strength training.
To get it back.
Right. Because the sport is aerobic, right? This is, Justin Collar always said, engines win championships, 100%. I would always say, you just have to be strong enough to get there.
Absolutely.
You don't even get to show up to play the game if you're not strong enough. But if you had that power lifter, what does that 16 weeks look like? Just really quick,
Yeah, we're reverse strength training. So
exactly. Yeah.
Jessica, who I coach, for example, Louis Simmons once saw her in a grocery store while she was at Ohio State and asked her to quit everything in life and come to Westside.
Dude, true story.
And she was like, I don't know who that is. She's like, I don't know who you are, you weird old man. And I was like, that was a legend.
That's awesome.
You're in the presence, you should have taken your shoes off. You're standing on holy ground. But yeah, so someone with that type of strength, we're talking about a female who can split jerk 265 without training the split jerk. We probably don't need to split jerk. We were joking around the other day. I allowed her to do some bench pressing with the group. And she was like, this is the first time I've bench pressed in training since you started coaching me. And I was like, yeah, there's a reason for that. So for her, the priority is conditioning. So when she's coming in the morning, we're doing that long 40 to 60 minute, potentially 90 minute, as we progress it out so she could handle it first thing when she comes in. Or even now when she's doing some of the group training in person, it's benefiting her that we do Mayhem compete pieces first.
Yeah.
Right. It's helpful for her, even if it makes her strength less, because when it dampens her strength, she's still hitting heavier lifts than everybody else in the group.
Yeah.
It's
that's good.
Just flip-flopping the athlete.
And I think just a quick side digression point is we're talking about people who want to improve in the sport of CrossFit. We're not talking about general fitness.
Yeah.
Although I would say, and this is, I guess, different from what CrossFit HQ would say, is that I think this style, minus the competing, but actually blocking your training and focusing on different priorities throughout the year. Again, still doing concurrent training, still training, meaning multiple energy systems, multiple movements, etc., keeping some level of constant variance in there, but still having prioritization throughout the year, I think is actually even better for health and longevity in the long run.
Definitely.
So that's, again, another conversation. So,
and I think what's cool about that too is even in off seasons, I've taken athletes who have come out of competition with nagging injuries and really had an opportunity to make them structurally sound or improve like position.
We've said those first 3 to 4 weeks sometimes are like laying a good foundation. Maybe we're doing some bodybuilding, right? Like prepping you for the heavy loads that are to come. We're not necessarily jumping out of the open and going, boom, 5x5 back squat. Let's go.
Sure.
You know, it might be single leg squatting and making sure you don't have any left or right asymmetries. It might be going, hey, let's get your like quad, let's get your core strong. Let's get your posterior chain really strong so we can handle that heavy load that's going to come in the next few weeks.
Yeah.
So
I think one of the biggest challenges, I was going to bring this up earlier, but one of the biggest challenges in an off-season program is like reminding athletes that like intensity doesn't always breed the results that you want, and you don't need intensity every day to do that. And there are so many different energy systems that need to be worked, that need specific style of workouts in order to work that energy system. Otherwise, you're just going to work the same energy system all the time.
Yeah. Strength is about recovery. It's nervous system driven, right? So if you're fatigued from doing too much intensity too often, you will not be able to express the strength that you have or get stronger to begin with.
Yep.
It's all like strength is all about managing fatigue. And that's why even plug Mayhem Performance Coaching, we're not just saying we're going to write your workouts. We're going to at least guide you in your nutrition. We're going to have conversations about it. We're going to have conversations about your lifestyle. We're going to coach the whole person. Are you sleeping enough? How are you managing your stress? Like if you have too much emotional work, relational stress outside of the gym, it's going to be really hard to get strong. Yeah. And so we can't put training in a box and just be like, you know, like there's so many external factors that are going to impact it, especially if you're trying to get strong, even aerobic. But yeah,
I think something I love about coaching remote clients, as a separate part of like the on-site coaching where it's all athletes who are basically don't have another job. Some of them do. Shout out to those guys who find a way to do that. But the remote clients that I work with, they're like, I have 2 hours every day, or I have 90 minutes every day, and I still want to compete because I love competing in the sport of CrossFit. So like, how can I maximize that, handle work stress, handle family stress, figure out how to sleep and recover and still do what I need to do to progress? That's challenging, which is it's actually sometimes even harder than the on-site person who's only doing like training for the games, because I know what they're doing outside of the gym.
Yeah. Sleeping. Essentially. How much does Nate sleep?
I need to get him sleeping less so he gets to the gym on time. It's like 13 hours a night.
Insane.
Usually.
Yeah. It's nuts.
Like, I think he's still growing.
Yeah.
But it's like a gallon of chocolate milk and then he sleeps for 13 hours. It's a wild life.
Yeah. Well, to wrap like a little bow on the conversation, I think then it's you. Oh man, the gallon of milk just totally made me freaking lose my train of thought. Like, cause I was just picturing how good that would freaking be right now. Good. You wrap the bow on the conversation. I don't remember what I was going to say, or start talking so I can remember.
Yeah. So I think just what we were saying is like with the remote athlete, it's just really cool as a coach to just figure out how to help people progress in the sport and be competitive while balancing other things. And that's what Mayhem Performance Coaching is. That's what Mayhem Compete is. I think really that's what Mayhem kind of goes over as a whole. That's where our core values come from. Like, we want to work with people who love CrossFit, who have a family, who want to live out their faith, and who want to serve others. And you can't do all of those things and just be like single-minded. And so many of the things that Mayhem is about in the fitness templates or coaching that they provide is someone that encompasses all of that, even our games athletes, which I think is rare. And it's just like fun and challenging to coach people like that.
Yeah. So go compete.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. That's the challenge yourself. And again, that's perfect. What I was going to say was, before to like wrap it up on top of that, is that's the whole point of what we're saying. It's like, when you have a job, when you're a dad, mom, full-time job, it's like, and you're spending 90 minutes or 2 hours a day training, like, dude, go have fun. Yeah. Go find that live competition in the off season, Wodapalooza, whatever. We keep saying Wodapalooza because Wodapalooza is a blast. Yeah. But it's like, find an off season comp, even at your gym or your affiliate, and throw down and use your fitness and have fun with us. Because at the end of the day, like, otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, there's local comps everywhere. Yeah. And like, people are missing out by not putting their fitness to the test. Like, we say we're competitors, and then all we're doing is just like training 3 hours a day in the gym to not compete.
Just don't do one every other weekend.
Yes.
And think you're going to get strong.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. You'll just get broken.
Yeah. Really. Just a disclaimer there.
Yeah, definitely. But I think by getting with a coach and laying that out, like, that will help you get better as a CrossFitter, and also like at the end of the day will make you better GPP, and you'll have something to look back on at your life when competing ends for everyone at some point.
For sure.
Even if you're a masters athlete, like those guys are incredible, but still, like at some point you probably won't compete. So while you have the chance to do it, like utilize your training and test yourself.
That's a bow. That's the official bow.
Nice.
Cut it there.